Hello, 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 hello. Hello, speaker and Zoom. Okay, audio settings. Da, 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 da. Hello, 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 hello. Okay. Hello, hello, hello. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Raising Vibrations. You're with Simon today. And today's video, we're going to be exploring Jupiter. And this is going to be applicable to the current Jupiter retrograde in Capricorn and its relationship to Pluto at the moment. This is going to be applicable to where you have Jupiter in your natal chart. This is going to be applicable to if you have Jupiter retrograde in your chart. And in general, this is going to be something that will be useful to you understanding the nature of Jupiter's transit in your life, ultimately. Okay. So what I would like to explore today is the fundamental building blocks of what Jupiter or how Jupiter manifests itself psychologically and emotionally for us, and to hopefully to give us a perspective on the current nature of the times that we're living in at the moment, considering that we have the South Node in Sagittarius, the North Node in Gemini for the collective. And at some point, those transiting nodes will also then conjunct the planetary nodes of Uranus, which is going to be a really big deal for us at a collective level. So to be honest, there's quite a lot of change that's going to be taking place for us within the context of our cosmology and our personal truth and where we see things. So pretty much this is what we're going to explore today. Okay. So the nature of this conversation today is going to be called Revelation and Reflection. And Capricorn function in this context over here is the reflection part, and Jupiter conjunct Pluto is the revelation part. And I think this is a very significant time for us. It is always a significant time for us, I suppose. But within the context of Jupiter's relationship to Saturn, Jupiter's relationship to Pluto, and those three planets themselves having this kind of party at the moment, this is something that's going to impact us for a very long period of time, right? Whenever Pluto is involved in something, you're knowing that we're going to be dealing with some really heavy stuff, both at an individual level, because we're part of the collective. And of course, as the collective actually steps into what it is that we are processing, as in what the collective is processing, then this is really significant. Like, it's truly. And I think that what is, what adds to the significance is how we are responding to this, and in like responding to it firstly, how we're trying to make sense of it, the nature of reality at the moment, and what it is maturing into, and how it's playing out, and again how we're trying to make sense of it, because we are on some level a large majority of people are trying to make sense of what is actually occurring for us, and how things have been progressively becoming more and more intense in some way, right? And that doesn't mean that for those of you that have found a place within inside of yourself of peace, that within your own personal world that might be not the case, this increasing intensity. But within the collective experience and what we're witnessing on the surface, there is definitely an increasing intensity. Okay, so let's have a look at, firstly, I want to just put across it's a cool little animation, Jupiter and its the storm. Okay, so this is the party that I was talking about over here. And as you can see, Saturn's in Aquarius, retrograde there, Jupiter is retrograde, and Pluto is in retrograde. So all three of those planets are now kind of pulling us back into what we've just been experiencing for the first part of this year. And a lot of us will be revisiting the dynamics in our lives that we were ultimately experiencing for the beginning part of this year. Revisiting them, not in the sense that this is going to be, maybe some of us will experience the intensity of it. Some of us will have, through reflection of what has taken place in our lives, we will get the opportunity to really see maybe the silver lining in some of the experiences. We may go back on some things that we've considered to be important for us. So there's a lot of movement back towards things, and then gaining better insight through revelations, right? So as we move into reflection and we re-experience some things, circumstances in our lives, we'll, manifest or experience revelation. And my perspective of it is that we are working through deeply within inside of ourselves the stories and the narratives and the perspectives and ideologies that made sense for us as a collective and individually in our lives. And so this kind of agreed truth that we've always bought into, or that we've always agreed upon at a subconscious level, this material is coming to the surface. And individually for us, we get this opportunity to really deeply objectify and begin to ask ourselves questions like, is this really true for me? That would be a really, really big reflection of these symbols at the moment. Now, Saturn's relationship to Uranus at the moment, as you can see here, Saturn and Uranus. I will be doing a video just talking about those two planets. But that Saturn-Uranus contact at the moment is definitely stimulating a lot about what will actually be imprinted in ourselves, and what we will emotionally begin to let go of, what we'll be processing. That square is kind of setting the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of the year. So whenever you try and interpret Uranus in a chart, you interpret it through the lens of what does no longer work for you, and supporting your ability to objectify and separate yourself from, in this particular case, a sense of truth or a sense of ideology or a sense of perspective that now from a different point of view, may not actually be correct for you, or may not actually be what is actually the truth for you. So it's kind of pulling away layers. So a lot of that Saturn Uranus contact over there is supporting this constant pressure between liberation and the need for order, the liberation and the need for order within the context of your life. And it will just feel like a constant pressure to kind of break out of things that feel outdated or no longer work for you more, or you feel stuck. Okay. Now, of course, the planetary ruler of the South Node is going to be Jupiter here. So Jupiter will cross over Pluto again. And that's significant because, of course, it's already crossed over there, and that's when kind of COVID-19 started to show itself. Now it's going to go back. We're going to revisit some things, revisit societal truths and perspectives and the law ultimately, and what we consider to be right behavior. What's the moral action? So I see one of the manifestations of this conjunction showing up as the divide that is occurring between human beings, between whether or not information about masks and wearing masks and not wearing masks is valid. And I'm going to actually pause there for a moment and just kind of invite a check-in, because by just simply mentioning the diversity between whether a mask is supportive or not, already brings us to the memory of some of our personal experiences that we've already had around this phenomena that's showing up in the collective at the moment. And again, Pluto is exposing, and that's the key word here, Pluto is exposing the deep undercurrent that is present with us, and Jupiter is being sort of the supporting cast, and Jupiter is revealing to us the different perspectives that we have. So Pluto says, well, let's expose the different perspectives, and Jupiter's saying, okay, well, it's cool, this is the conversation. The danger to this, or the shadow complex over here, is how we are unable to, in a sense, find a balance between our judgment of what we consider to be right and our judgment of what we consider to be incorrect. So this moral judgment. And then to go even deeper than that, it reveals to us the nature of our human condition, which is ultimately we are going to be influenced deeply by our fears and our primal brain. We're deeply going to be affected by, how our limbic system operates. And this is being seen throughout the collective and throughout the way that we are trying to make sense of some really, really deep, powerful changes that are occurring for us within our own personal lives and, of course, in the collective. So this has a lot to do with this trying to find the freedom from truth that is repressive. And the irony is that both sides of the coin are doing the same thing, but it looks completely different. One says no masks, the other says yes masks. Either way, there's a kind of trauma/liberation from each perspective that is feeling oppressive to the other. Okay. So that would be that symbolism over there kind of revealing itself. And we're kind of processing that at the moment. As I said, the planet ruler of the South Node, as it progresses through Sagittarius, will just bring into focus this issue. As the planetary node of Uranus gets activated over here, you're going to see more progressive alienation from people who don't conform to or believe in the same perspective as yourself. And that diversity will either lead to a complete duality and polarization even more, or it could lead to perspectives where we are able to disagree while at the same time understanding the relevance of where the person is coming from. And this is something that I think is pretty complex for us at the moment. And that is, how do we live in a world where we can ask ourselves the question, what is the storyline that is influencing this person's actions and truth? What is the storyline that is influencing my actions, perspective, and truth? Like, for instance, here we come into the world at the moment, and it's very clear that there's a very strong divide between, or that, like, fake news and conspiracy. Okay. Now, most of there's a kind of stigma that's manifesting itself at the moment, where if you, for instance, give an indication that you might be questioning things, right, Jupiter, Gemini, that questioning could lead to a categorization, as in labeled and then classified and categorized into a sector or into a block of people who are then conspiracy orientated. And then people have made up their mind, they've judged it. And then you have other people that are not interested in that sense. And then that also becomes a categorization, right? We're categorizing ourselves and putting ourselves in boxes relative to what we perceive to be the truth. And this dynamic, this phenomena itself, is, from my point of view, looking at the planetary nodes of Uranus, which are in Sagittarius and Gemini. They're at 16 degrees. South node at 16, north node in Gemini at 16. So this complex that will show up is, how do we actually ask ourselves the question, well, what is leading somebody to go down and investigate conspiracy theory? Okay. Is it that there is an inherent need to reject another person's perspective and reclaim a sense of authority within themselves? And so it's important to come to some version of the truth that is not given in a scripted way. That would be kind of a Jupiter thing. You're more likely to see people with Jupiter retrograde, Saturn retrograde, Jupiter in the 8th house, that are trying to make sense of things but don't have an inherent trust. Maybe there's a trust trauma. This has a lot to do with trust. It has a lot to do with wanting to, in some sense, if you want to go really deep into this process, you can even think of it as unresolved parental authoritative material, as in trauma that is associated, or displaced emotion that is associated with governmental authority figures. This is not the absolute truth. This is mere an aspect of this that leads into questioning things without just being told this is what it is. That will be a dynamic. It is also a complex, in my view, as the progressive awakening of human beings that is very, very much supported here with this kind of conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto, which is breaking down old ideologies and truths that were rooted in perspectives that are more of a religious nature, as an example. So we've got a lot more, um, you know, self-sacrificing truths where people will sacrifice their own needs to meet another person and then feel guilty for it, or a lot of these types of also psychological and emotional things are being brought to the surface. Like, we're witnessing ourselves understand how and what it is that we define our truth to be. And this phenomena, as it becomes more and more aware to us, as these planets bring it to the surface, will show up in these different ways. And ultimately, the point here with those symbols is really just to ask yourself the question: what is the nature of your conditioning? What is the nature of the deep trust that exists between your sense of truth and your vulnerability? As an example, where is the vulnerability in your truth? Where is the vulnerability in your sense of authority around how you actually search for the meaning of truth from your perspective? How do you become less identified with the truth itself, but more about what it's actually opening up in you? And that would be some of the types of questions that would materialize with this. So what I want to do here is I want to bring us to something that has been deeply fascinating to me, and was actually the reason for this video, to be honest. And so as you can see, this is called the Natural Zodiac, and the Natural Zodiac consists of 12 signs, and these signs are interplaying with each other. Okay, there's a kind of interplay between each other here. And what I want to do today is I want to show you the mechanics behind the archetype of Jupiter and Sagittarius, and show how the shadow complex can show up and what it looks like to integrate progressively the Sag archetype, so that as we kind of navigate this journey, you become your own internal awakener. You kind of reclaim your own inner truth, and you start to progressively navigate this world of complete illusion and mass information in a way that keeps your moral compass guided. And that's ultimately what it's really about here, from my point of view, is to be able to really anchor into a sense of connection within yourself that is your own moral compass of what integrity looks like. So I think integrity is a massive keyword associated with the current times at the moment. And the weird thing about it is that where there is lack of integrity, where there is an expansion or an over grandiose sense of power, it's going to be called out, it's going to be seen, and people will naturally act in ways where that will be exposed. So Pluto is taking all the prisoners. It's like it's not playing any games at the moment. So one of the examples that I don't know if you've come across recently is the expression of this person called Brian Rose and London Real. And it's deeply fascinating to me because of the nature of how it's materialized with Jupiter, Pluto, and the nature of freedom of speech, etc., and how the internet has become a place for deregulated information that can, in a sense, add or contribute to the loss of integrity, or the loss of one's own deep transparency and authenticity. And it's linked in with this picture that you're seeing here at the moment. And so I'm going to talk to that, and I'm going to come back to the Brian Rose process, and then how this kind of links in with the Sagittarius archetype. Okay, so Truth Coming Out of Her Well by Jean-Léon Gérôme. This was painted in 1896, and I find this a deeply fascinating story. Some of you may know it very well, and some of you are, fairly new to this process. But it encapsulates the essence of the energy at the moment in a very deep way. And there's two versions of the story, and I'm going to share two of them. If anybody else knows another version, please feel free to write this in the comments. So the first version I'm going to go to is there's this beautiful interplay between Truth, who is this woman over here that you see, and the polarity Lie. And the first story goes along like this, where Truth as you see her, she's coming out of the well. She's in a really deep sort of like sense of distress and anger. And, our vision of what we're seeing here in this split moment can paint a picture of what's actually occurring. But one of the reasons why I actually did a black space over here, and also why this picture is faded in, was and this is my kind of artistic expression in some way, is to illustrate that the vision of what you see here can be so misinterpreted that it's very difficult for us to actually know the truth by just having one painted picture. So the media paints a picture and gives a perspective. And then so from that point of view, we could perceive the truth to literally be that. And so that becomes it becomes defining. And that's what I think the Sagittarius, Jupiter, and the nodes shifting into Gemini and Sagittarius are about. It's our capacity to really be very curious and open to what only leads to this moment, and investigating what it is that actually brought this to the surface. So why is this image and her in this distressed state? What has led to this moment? So we can have context, and context is important. And we know this, context gives us a tremendous amount of clarity as to what is actually occurring for us. So Lie meets up with Truth one day, and Lie says to Truth, "Oh, look at the beautiful sky. It's truly amazing. What an amazing day." And Truth is like, "Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's true. It's always, sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's not." And Lie says to Truth, "Oh, wow, look at this amazing like bath area. And let's hang out, right? Let's hang out together and let's talk about stuff on this beautiful sunny day." And so they both take off their clothes and they both get into the well, etc. And after a while, Lie climbs out the bath and steals Truth's clothes and runs away with it. And so what happens is that in her distressed state, Truth comes out the well, obviously realizing that her clothes have been taken, and she's sort of seen as the naked truth. And so a reflection of the context of society is that when we see the truth when we see truth naked in this way, it really shocks us. It really kind of disturbs us in that sense. So we get this sense of, just like this picture expresses, it's not something where she's perceived in the story as somebody that's just kind of calm and chilled out and placid. She's actually in some way being seen and portrayed as this really uncomfortable expression. And truth is ultimately the naked truth, or the ugly truth, as it were. And then the other version of it is that, of course, similar to that, truth and lie having a conversation, same scenario. They get into this well and they're talking, etc. And then lie steals truth's clothes and parades around in society. So lie is wearing the coats of truth, and so we perceive on the surface to be true, but really it's just a lie. And this is very much the nature of the relationship between Pisces and Sagittarius, where things can appear to be on the surface as something that's truthful or real, but really beneath the surface it's something that's actually pretty distorted. And this is kind of the nature of the times that we're living in at the moment, that the ugly truth itself is very difficult for us to bear or to witness. And so we can kind of disassociate from that process. It's a lot easier for society to turn a blind eye from something that's seemingly obvious. And that in and of itself is the parable of conspiracy theory. It's that within the root of conspiracy theory, people that are wanting to call out, in a sense, the illusion, that when they pull out the truth itself, society says, "Oh, that's the ugly truth. I don't want to know it." And then the other side of it is that there is an agenda in the way that information can be deeply misled and expressed, that can parade as the truth, but yet at the same time, there's this essence of not actually being completely integrity, like having integrity and having honesty and having authenticity, but it appears to be completely valid and sincere and truthful. And that's kind of the polarity that I see within the context of the world at the moment, in the Pluto Jupiter conjunction, within our own charts, but of course within the collective as well. And this comes down to our sense of orientation. At a deeper level, we got to really ask ourselves, what infuses us? Do we need a sense of safety And so in that sense of safety, does the illusion of truth in appearing as truth but actually as a lie, supporting that sense of security, because the polarity to that is to face uncomfortable information that could really shatter our illusions or shatter that comfortability. And that's kind of what I see the challenge here at the moment. So I want to come back to the thing about Brian Rose and stuff. I don't know if you follow Rebel Wisdom, but there was a few days of investigation where, uh, Brian Rose and Rebel and London Real had created this thing with David Icke, and they did a tremendous amount of exposure. Now David Icke's going to talk about these things, etc. And there was tons and tons of people responding to it. And my interpretation of that is that because humanity on the let's look at truth coming out the well as something that's comfortable, let's not look at the lies masking as truth, people are deeply in need for a leadership or some form of person to be in a state of power, that Pluto, to illuminate this, to bring the truth to the surface, to bring the naked truth to the surface. And this would kind of be David Icke. And so London Real saw this opportunity to expose and boost themselves in a way, and create this really profound thing. And on some sense, there was an intention there to be very honest with that process. But at the same time, it also exposed humanity's deep unresolved, and particularly in his case, his unresolved scarcity complexes, because what manifested from that was him building this private GoFundMe type of experience in which people paid money to invest into him in the name of free speech. And what had happened was that after a while, it started to actually realize that this wasn't the case, and was really, really often there was something dodgy about it. And to cut a short story long, we're in times where it's very easy in the internet to be able to masquerade and appear something like, for instance, the new realization of how intense deep fake is. And it's difficult to navigate. It's difficult to know, what on the surface it looks like. Something like a person like David Icke, for instance, really fighting for free speech, and London Real using this opportunity to, in the name of free speech, exploit the vulnerabilities within the collective that are so desperately needing to not live in a world where that sense of lie walking around with truth's clothes on, appearing to be true, but really are actually at a deeper level got a distortion associated with it. And that's what's actually really, really powerful at the moment, is this essence of Pluto, vulnerability within society, within the structure. And it's really, really important to notice your own vulnerabilities and what will actually influence your sense and guide your sense of what truth you will want to use to be able to sustain ultimately what is needed within our society and what is needed within ourselves. Okay. So I'm gonna now move over to the natural zodiac, and I just want to show you some things here of how Sagittarius is kind of put into play, and what that looks like in terms of the mechanics. All right. So between Sagittarius and the Cancer archetype, Cancer requires familiarity and sense and connection. It requires familiarity, and this familiarity is security. So inherently within every single truth or cosmology that we choose to subscribe to, there's a blind spot between how that makes us or gives us a sense of orientation, to feel an identity, to feel a sense of familiarity to the phenomenal world. So even an atheist, for example, that doesn't believe in God or hasn't got no philosophy in that sense, is still identifying through a Sag archetype, because the label atheism, as an example, cannot actually be spoken or identified, or in a sense become a part of a person's identity, unless there was a perspective. And so within each of us inherently, whatever perspective you choose, it's always going to be rooted from a deep emotional sense of security and a sense of identity that comes from that. Okay. And it's really important to note that, because once we externalize our truth, as in we become identified with a collective ideology or a collective narrative, then what we do is we become connected to that. We become identified with that, and we externalize that sense of security. If, for instance, somebody comes along and says that truth's not real, then what happens is that security actually gets threatened. It's not the cosmology, it's the threatening of our sense of identity. Of course, that's primal. We need that orientation. So what actually manifests from this is the nature of how, at the moment, it's very difficult for us to collaborate on the diversity of truth, because until we've come to understand and internalize our own inner security around what our truth is about, we will always be subjected to somebody that will point out the vulnerability and where we have an attachment to an external ideology, an external sense of truth that we will subscribe to at a collective level. And so it's that kind of inconjunct. And so the inconjunctus teaches us that we need to internalize our truth, so that when we are being debated with, and when we're being, when we have a core philosophy that we're communicating to, it's not coming from a place of needing to externalize the validation or convince and convert. Okay. Let's look over at this over here. So the Capricorn Cancer axis, obviously what happens is that our truth needs to be, it has to have a sense of boundary. It needs to be defined. So the Capricorn archetype in relationship to Cancer says, well, yes, that's true. Our truth or our perspective has to be coming from a place of internal security, because if we are to be, in a sense, if that sense of definition, outer definition, is threatened, what we're losing, again, as I've mentioned before, is our sense of connection to the truth, not the actual nature of ourselves. And that's what's really occurring. Again, as I said, it's like when we're debating, when we're telling this person this is what the truth is and that's what the truth is, and there's a conflict, it's ultimately where we're trying to categorize and place people into specific things so that we can then be able to know who we are in relation to them. This is kind of what this Capricorn opposition is about. And ultimately, the Capricorn opposition is teaching us that until we actually find the authority within ourselves to define and validate our truth as it is, and no need to convince somebody or to tell them what is right or wrong, we will then find inner peace, ultimately, with that opposition. Okay, and that dysregulates us, because now what happens is that the natural square or 90-degree aspect, which is a tension aspect between Capricorn and Libra, teaches us that, when we have when we're debating with somebody else, right, and we're debating a truth, like let's say, for instance, science and religion, that science and spirituality, or science and religion, right? The religious pastor will see life in a more metaphorical, mystical way, whereas the scientist will see life more as a very logical process. And I think one of the great examples of one of these types of dynamic, well, there's many, to be honest, is how do we actually relate Libra, the nature of this truth? How do we actually feel included, Libra, by the nature of the truth? And how do we feel excluded? So right now, as Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, of course, are driving through here at the moment through the constellation Capricorn, we'll become very aware of this polarization between inclusion and exclusion. Libra is all about where we feel included and accepted and where we don't. So right now, that inconjunct, or that square between Capricorn and Libra, teaches us that within our cosmology, we will inherently find people that will agree with us, and so we can feel a sense of communion in exploring truth, and we'll have people that will disagree with us, and that's where we'll find exclusion. In its shadow forms, this is an inability to accept another person's point of view. In a more integrated form, this is an inquiry into, oh, that's interesting, how did you come to that truth? Share with me a little bit about what your process is, what has led you to feel that this is what the correct version of truth is about. And it's kind of really opening up to inquiry versus how could you believe that that's the truth? You sheeple, as an example. It's very condescending and excluding versus inclusive and allowing. And it comes from a humble state of, I might not know fully the truth. I just know what I'm comfortable with relative to my security need. And then as you can see over here, the natural square that takes place between Cancer and Libra is, again, our sense of identity and polarity, Cancer, is deeply linked with the people that will agree with us. So as an example of how you could do this, you could go make a statement on your Facebook page or Instagram account or Twitter, right? And you will notice the square take place very quickly, because some people that will feel familiarity towards you will give you a thumbs up and like and say, oh, that's agreed, and, you know, speak the truth. Somebody that will disagree with you will then reflect their sense of not wanting to, you know, not participating in that. And so there's always this dynamic tension between people familiar with your truth and kind of creating an echo chamber, and people that disagree with it. And again, the shadow complex here is that when we become overly identified with the truth from another person, it leads us to things like expectations that may be, in some sense, like an expectation for another person to accept our truth. And what it teaches us in that moment is, when we're expecting another person to accept our truth, why is it that we can't actually say that to ourselves? Or why are we not accepting that person's truth? And that's kind of how that square shows up in our ability to really see that at a very deep level, the process that is available for us, so the collective, and of course for those of you that are watching this right now, to feel into the nature of how you accept truth as it is for another person. And remember, this all has to do with resolution, by the way. This all has to do with resolution. If you're communicating with somebody that, say, for instance, has a capacity, a resolution, an interpretation of life that is, in a sense, maybe not as developed in one area as it is in another area for another person, and two people collaborate, again, if you take a debate of somebody of how to get a rocket in space, and you take a librarian and a biker, like, the resolution of that conversation is going to be deeply limited, because the context of information that has been internalized and explored for those two people is not going to be as expanded as, say, somebody that is an actual physicist or that is exploring rocket science. So what we're looking at here is that, keep in mind that as we navigate this world and you find yourself exploring truth and taking it in as in information, be aware of your own desire to not look at the ugly truth, and be aware of your sensitivity to not knowing if the truth itself is being hidden with by the lie. Okay, as in the lie is wearing the truth's clothes to appear as if it's true, but it's not. So be aware of this process and do your investigation. Connect to your inner intuition. This is ultimately the core here. It's like every single person's sense of self is being deeply challenged at the moment, and you've got to be paying attention to your instincts. You've got to be paying attention. If there's any a time to be paying attention to the reality right now, it's now. Okay, so in a sense, I hope that what I've shared with you today has really illuminated the complexity of the world that we're living in right now, and also, in a sense, given you something to process. And I'm super excited to hear your thoughts in the comments. And please be mindful as you're commenting in that sense as well. And yeah, thanks very much, everybody. I would like to let you know that if you want to work with myself and Jennifer within Distributor in your own charts, I will post links to our website in the comments and also in the description below. Both myself and Jennifer are evolutionary astrologers and human design guides. So we have something on our website that can facilitate that if you want to do that. We love exploring the astrology with you. And what else did I want to mention? Our Patreon page, that's where our community is at the moment. It's something that is really, really close to us. And so we spend a lot of time really wanting to build that and work with that. So if you feel a deep desire to want to join us in our Patreon community and share and participate in our calls, etc., I'll also put a link in the description below. Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks very much for listening today. I hope that you had something of valuable, and I look forward to you in another meeting. Bye.